Well, welcome to this very special segment of Don't Know Much About. We're just about 1 week away from the first ever symposium to combat anti-Zionism, not anti-Semitism, not hate, but today's most lethal variant of an ancient hatred of the Jews. The first ever World Symposium Against Antizionism is being hosted by Stop Antizionism and Tafsik. The day is packed with panels from what is anti-Zionism to disinformation, education, alternative media. Our keynote speaker is none other than Ben Shapiro, co-founder of the Daily Wire. With me today is Natasha Pein, co-founder of Stop Antizionism with me, and of course, Ben Shapiro. Ben, Natasha, welcome to my show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Ben, the first question I have for you is follows. Look, in the year 2017, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks said Jew hatred functions like a virus. It mutates. Now, I argue that we're now firmly in the third era or mutation, which is anti-Zionism, but most Jewish institutions still spend the bulk of their energy fighting the second era of Jew hatred. They're fighting swastikas, Holocaust denial, neo-Nazis. They're inoculating against a variant we'll pretty much built immunity to. As someone who commands one of the largest audiences in America, do you think the organized Jewish world is fighting the last war? And what does it cost us when we name what's happening on campuses anti-Semitism rather than anti-Zionism? What say you?
So I think that you're right that they are fighting the last war. I think that the term anti-Semitism has lost extraordinary amounts of meaning because of its over-application and in some cases under-application. So the very definition of anti-Semitism for most people, if you ask a normal person walking around who doesn't spend a lot of time with these issues, what is an anti-Semite? A person would say, a person who hates Jews. And they would think of it basically as a form of racism, but against Jewish people. And that, of course, is not what anti-Semitism is. Anti-Semitism is a broader conspiracy theory about the power of Jews in the world, the idea being that all the problems in the world are attributable to some small cadre of Jews who are organizing events to their own benefit. And when you see anti-Semitism in that definition, then anti-Zionism obviously falls within that category, because anti-Zionism is the idea that the Jews are changing the rules for themselves, that they are abusing the trust that has been placed in them in a Jewish state, that they somehow have exceptions that are applied to them rather than rules, and that they are manipulating world events, right? All of those are part of the sort of anti-Zionist movement. And so obviously that fits under the broader rubric of the theory of anti-Semitism. But because people don't understand what anti-Semitism is, instead they say, wait a second, you're saying that if I say something that's not true about Israel, like Israel committed a genocide, that means I hate Jews. It's like, well, no, that's not what we're saying. And this is why the entire attempt to say something is anti-Semitic, therefore bad, and anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism, therefore also bad, that is a failed logic that is not going to work. Anti-Zionism needs to be argued against on its own merits. And there are a bunch of ways to do that. I mean, the most obvious way is to point out that it is one thing to say that you were anti-Zionist in 1900, when the question was whether there ought to be the establishment of a political state in Israel that was Jewish in nature. It's another thing to say that some 80 years after the creation of the state of Israel. It's like saying that you want to eliminate Pakistan from the map, but somehow you're not anti-Pakistani. Pakistan exists. It has existed for about the exact same amount of time as the state of Israel. Nobody argues that Pakistan ought to be wiped off the map or that Pakistan is fundamentally illegitimate, even though it is a Muslim state that actually is governed by Sharia law in religious ways far stricter than anything remotely related to the state of Israel. Nobody makes that argument at all. The reality is that, as I've said many times now, I think that Jews, particularly, and advocates for Israel, advocates for Jews, need to stop talking about anti-Semitism more broadly and start talking about what is moral and what is true. Anti-Zionism is immoral and untrue. Just remove the entire sort of fake conversation that happens about what is anti-Semitism and what isn't anti-Semitism, because the term has lost all meaning.
Absolutely. Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Natasha, you have a question.
Yes, Ben, I grew up under the Soviet regime, and everyone understood that Zionist was a code word for Jew. Jews knew it, non-Jews knew it. When Soviets spread anti-Zionist propaganda and attacked Zionists or excluded Jews, nobody believed it was merely about Israeli policy. I was bullied as a child during those campaigns and called Zhidovka, which is a slur for a Jew. Today, I see many of those same Soviet anti-Zionist narratives merged with Islamist ideologies and repackaged in West through campuses, media, and activism. Yet many educated and intellectual people still insist anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are completely separate. That is one reason why we launched the global declaration stating that anti-Zionism is a Jew hatred, to help people recognize the pattern before it's too late. Do you think the Jewish world and the West are finally ready to connect those dots, or are we still resisting the obvious?
I think that people are still resisting the obvious because I think that, frankly, the Soviet operation to sort of push that message, which has been their message since 1967, really in the aftermath of the Six-Day War, there's very good evidence that the Soviet Union really started pushing this narrative that Zionism was a form of apartheid, was a form of genocide, and that it was totally separate from Jew hatred generally. They started pushing that in the aftermath of the Six-Day War, and that really took root in America's universities and in Western universities in Europe as well. Again, I think that the thing that I would point out is that we don't live in a world anymore where, quote unquote, hatred of Jews is even considered inherently bad. So you have to start with that, and then you have to move to, okay, what is the anti-Zionism movement? What is it attempting to do? And the answer is the anti-Zionism movement is not an attempt to establish a democratic republic along the lines of the United States of America. The anti-Zionist movement is about establishing what would be an Islamic caliphate in Israel with all the Jews as second-class citizens or dead. And so the sort of attempt to then draw a distinction between the hard reality of that and Jew hatred is very, very difficult. And this is why when people say, okay, so what is your solution to Zionism? People say, okay, well, there'll be a one-state solution. And the question, okay, what does a one-state solution look like? And everybody understands that a one-state solution looks like the Jews either murdered, as they were on October 7th, or second-class citizens, as they were for legitimately hundreds of years in the Islamic world. How do you say that that is not anti-Jew in some way? Obviously, the policy is anti-Jewish and designed to harm Jews. And so, again, I think that the thing that we have to really fight against, those of us who are fighting against those who hate Jews, we have to fight against the attempt to even talk about this issue in terms of Jew versus not Jew, because the reality is the only people on earth who care predominantly about Jews and about anti-Semitism are Jews and people who hate Jews. The entire bulk of the people in the middle are confused by the issue. They don't even know why it's being talked about. They're not understanding the framing. And so trying to get into the sophistications of Bundist in the Soviet Union versus, say, Zionist in the Soviet Union, that's so far beyond how people are even thinking about these issues. The way we should be talking, again, is what do people want to do? Do you want to eliminate the state of Israel? If you do, you want a lot of Jews to die. Hard for me to perceive that as anything other than hatred of Jews. Because there's literally no other country on earth where you would advocate for this.
Right. Ben, I think that what you said is really important. I just want to kind of dial into that a bit, which is that there was a study that recently came out by NCRI that said that people who hold anti-Zionist views have a moral inversion, meaning, for instance, they are okay with authoritarian states. They are okay with Islamic caliphates. And so, for instance, my question to you is, I've seen a lot of more on the conservative side, the Jewish side, saying, look, this isn't just about Jews in Israel. This is about the West. We have to save the West, but they hate the West. So what do we do? What do we do with people who have been captured by anti-Zionism? It's a comorbid disease that they also hate themselves. They hate the West. So what is your answer to that?
I mean, the answer is that I think that actually is a very, very important argument to make, because I think most Americans care much more about the West than they do about Israel or about anti-Semitism as a general rule. They're parts of the West. And even if they have only a passing sort of familiarity with the Middle East, when you point out that the people who wish to destroy the state of Israel also wish to destroy America, and for the same exact reasons, then they tend to get their blood up a little bit. You're obviously correct. I mean, the fact is that there's sort of different brands of anti-Zionism that have cropped up and different brands of anti-Semitism. The left brands of anti-Zionism is basically just an anti-success model that suggests that anyone, Western civilization, Israel, or even individually, anybody who's successful must be an exploiter, somebody who's done wrong to somebody else. And Thomas Sowell it correctly said, if Jews want to fight anti-Semitism, there's one thing they can do, and it's fail. And if you wish to succeed, then you are immediately going to be labeled the exploiter or the person who's on the wrong moral side because you are powerful or because you have been good at the thing that you do. And so, that is one argument that I think needs to be articulated. And then, of course, you have this sort of right-wing anti-Zionism that has cropped up that is pretty open almost classical anti-Semitism. Yeah. The idea, again, that Jews are drinking Christian blood, or that Jews hate Christians, or that Jews are attempting to subvert Christianity, right? The case that's being made by, say, Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens, that is a bit of a different brand. And so sort of lumping all of these things together and saying they're the same, I don't think that does us any favors either. I think specificity is the thing that makes arguments clearer and makes them more convincing.
Well, let's talk about what's happening on the on the political right. And I have to tell you, I've been studying this for many years, and I couldn't foresee the right taking on these classical anti-Semitism, but also toying with kind of grievance narratives and this new anti-Zionism. What is going on there? I mean, in my opinion, I believe that the MAGA movement was somewhat successful in uniting people and critically bringing people over who were historically or traditionally would have voted for the Democrats. Is there some sort of infiltration division? What is going on, do you think?
I mean, so the answer is yes. There are a lot of people, the more traditional Republicans are significantly more pro-Israel, more pro-Jewish than a lot of the people who are sort of the people who've been added to the Trump coalition, per se. I will say that again, one of the things that's been happening in American politics is the rise of a grievance politics on the right that suggests that the institutions have failed, that the economy is failing a group of people, that there's a huge group of people who are victims. And it is the mirror, as James Lindsay says, the woke ideology says a certain group of people are victims. The people who are victims are the victims of the successful. And you see that on the right. It's just a different group of victims. But the people who are successful seem to be the same, right? They look at that various industries, Jews are disproportionately represented, or they look at the state of Israel, which is disproportionately successful and very, very solid militarily. And they say, well, they must have been the exploiters. They're manipulating America for their own gain. I think on the right, they're also plugging into a long and egregious history of religious anti-Semitism. And that's been a dormant generator in American politics for a very, very long time. I certainly didn't grow up with it. That's the part that I did not expect, was sort of the reversion to almost, as you say, classical anti-Semitic themes, things that are directly from the protocols of the elders of Zion, or actual full-scale, like classical blood libels, which is the sort of stuff that Candace Owens has been spewing. Like that I didn't see come. But again, in a world where conspiracism is extremely popular because of the failure of our truth-telling institutions, that has opened the door to any sort of conspiracy theory, including the ones that go directly to your limbic system and make you the most passionate and outraged.
Right. You have spoken about the kind of breakdown of the trust in institutions as one of maybe a driving force. Yeah. What about, do you think, like, I'm looking at people like Megyn Kelly, for instance, who began with, I'm just criticizing. Why are you shutting down? I'm wondering if there's some sort of overuse of this reflexive knee-jerk anti-Semitism that may be a mistake.
Well, I mean, I think that with Megyn, what probably happened there is that she tactically decided to embrace many of the same arguments that are being used by the Tuckers and the Candaces by claiming that my opposition to her behavior with regard to, say, Erica Kirk, it must have had to do with Israel or must have had to do with Jews, which of course is not true. If you go back and listen to this TPUSA speech that I gave back in December, in which I explained what podcasters I think in my industry have been doing wrong, things that are immoral, I didn't mention Israel one time. I didn't mention the only context in which I mentioned anti-Semitism was Nick Fuentes, who's an open anti-Semite. Megyn decided to respond by basically saying that I was attacking her for anti-Semitism and throwing that charge at me in order to avoid having to defend herself on actual accurate charges. So instead, she threw up this red herring, and a lot of the internet decided to eat that up, because online, the idea is that Jews are constantly calling people anti-Semites. They're constantly worried about themselves. Again, it's a charge that plays back into a generalized theory that Jews are cliquish and self-interested and all the rest of this kind of stuff. I would say that it's beneath her, but it seems like very little is beneath her these days in terms of trying to pursue click.
Unbelievable.
That is what it is, unfortunately.
So is it ignorance about anti-Semitism versus like, is it ignorance from the right, or it's intentional?
Well, no, I think for the influencers, a lot of it is quite intentional. I would say that for the vast majority of people who are taking this in, who I would say disproportionately young, spend a lot of time online, that is ignorance. They don't know enough about history. They don't know enough about even what's going on. But they believe they are informed because there are people who are providing them the secrets of the universe. They're unlocking the secrets of how the world works with conspiratorial language. And look, there's a shadow system that I've pulled back the veil. I've red-pilled you, or I've black-pilled you on how America really works, the true systems of power. And that feels really good to people. I mean, when you tell people that the failures of their own life, the problems they experience in their own life are all explicable, and they're explicable because there is a nefarious group of people who are actually pulling the strings, that's a pretty sexy pitch. I can see why people buy into it, especially young people, especially because if you push back against it, then you look as though you're school-marming them, right? You're censoring them, right? You're lecturing them. Right? This is actually something that Candace Owens said about me over the weekend. She said, people are tired of Ben lecturing them. And I said, well, I'm if you are, first of all, you don't have to listen. That's fine. But second of all, I don't consider it a lecture to point out when you say things that are overtly untrue. That's not a lecture. But if we're going to take the sort of 15-year-old boy position that anytime somebody tells you not to shove your face in an oven, that this is somehow a form of lecture, then I guess we can do that, but there are going to be a lot more burned faces.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Let's move to a different part of all of this, which is about Judaism. And look, you're an Orthodox Jew. For you, I gather, correct me, Zionism, it's not a political opinion. It's really like downstream for Torah, peoplehood, thousands of years of Jewish people facing Jerusalem. And by the way, I would argue that it's the same for most Jews in the diaspora, yet you know this, and I know this, that for some American Jews, and mostly they're the secular progressives, they've been taught that Zionism is this political position, and that in order to be a good Jew, you have to really criticize Israel, bash Israel, oppose Israel. We see this with Jewish Voices for Peace, if not now. Jewish students joining the encampment. How do we rebuild this understanding that Zionism is really a pillar of Jewish identity? What do you think? What do you think has been lost, and how do we do that?
Well, I mean, make your kids Jewish. I mean, it really is that simple. My kids are not going to have this problem. I send my kids to a Jewish day school. My kids have been celebrating Jewish holidays since they were born. My kids go to Israel regularly, and my kids study Torah. So I mean, like, I'm not sure, like this. It is an integrated part of their life in the same way that Shabbat is an integrated part of their life. And so I think it's very weird when people are saying, well, my kid isn't a Zionist. Well, if you didn't have them interface with Judaism in any serious way for the first 18 years of their life, and then they're hearing from all of their friends that Israel's an apartheid state that's killing little kids in the Gaza Strip, and they don't get to go to the cool kid parties unless they say it. And if they do say it, they not only do they get to go to the cool kid parties, they're the coolest kid at the cool kid party because they've dissociated from their own people in pursuit of global citizenship, which earns you a real sort of strange new respect. Not only that, you also get to claim that you're not a white person, which is really attractive to a lot of liberal Jews, right? Like, you don't want to be part of the white majority. And so it doesn't matter that you actually are a secular atheist from a blue area that is indistinguishable in every way from the quote unquote white majority. You can now get to claim both minority status, which is to say, quote unquote, victimhood status, at the same time that you are dissociating from the people who you are supposedly supposed to be identifying from. So you look broad-minded, you look as though you're a minority, you look like you get to take victimhood status, like all of the wonderful things at once. Well, I mean, I can see why people would go for that benefit. It's a pretty great pitch. But when people ask, why is my 18-year-old turning against Israel? The answer is because you did a crappy job for the first 17 years. I mean, I'm sorry to break it to you. I have 4 kids going on 5. My oldest is 12. And, I would be quite shocked, given the nature of how we have raised them, were they to be anything other than Zionists, because, again, Zionism is just an integral part of Judaism. It just means that, I mean, again, we pray multiple times a day for the restoration of Jerusalem, multiple times a day. And every single holiday is basically built around things like, the holiness of the land of Israel and the religious value of the land of Israel. And so again, it's such a bizarre question when I hear from people, and the answer is in the same way that I hear politically more generally. How did my kid become a far leftist when they went to college? The answer is because you didn't raise them as a conservative for the first 17 years of your life, and they went there, and then it was a better pitch to be able to go and drink with their friends and talk about the evils of the capitalist system than it is to actually defend principles that you never inculcated in them.
It's like there is a saying that it's not the Jews who kept the Shabbat, it's the Shabbat who kept the Jews. A lot, basically, the Jewish tradition. And this is so true, because when we keep Shabbat, when we actually observe, when we do the holidays, when we educate our kids, we expect them to eventually, end up as Zionists. It's part of our culture, part of that tradition.
I mean, well, this is the thing. If you go to Israel, so nobody worries that much in Israel, at least not in the modern day. I mean, maybe they worried 30 years ago when you had the rise of the Shalom Achshav movement, and the post-Oslo kind of area, the post-Zionist movement, which thankfully was relatively short-lived. But if you go to Israel right now and you go and you sit with Chilonim, right, people who are secular in Israel, they are more Jewish culturally and even in their practice than the vast majority of American Jews who consider themselves reform or conservative.
Exactly.
Right? They actually do something on Friday nights. They have Jewish weddings. They are even the ones who are not fully fasting on Yom Kippur are bicycling around on Friday, on Yom Kippur evening in Tel Aviv. And the sort of cultural inculcation into a Jewish lifestyle, however broadly you want to define that, is quite real. That is not the case for a lot of Jews who are being raised in the West, who've been told to basically treat Judaism as a weird thing that you do once in a while. That it's a thing that grandma did way back when, but it's not a thing you have to do. Why would you be surprised when your kids are not interested in anything remotely interested? I mean, again, it's holistic. Most people don't navigate the world in particular ways because they have thought through rationally their positions, they navigate the world in particular ways because they have parents and family and friends who do these things, and because they were brought up in a particular way. And then later they learn the rationalization for the thing that they are doing.
My only pushback to you, because I spent a lot of time in Jewish education, is that a lot of these people do it dafka. They're like, because I'm a Jew, I'm doing this. I'll give you an example. Right. I'll give you an example. Growing up, I was taught tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. And for many years, I thought that's the entirety. But no, later on, I found out that the entire tractate is justice, justice shall you pursue in the land that I, Hashem, have given unto you. It's about being just sovereigns, Jewish sovereigns on our land. But because these Jewish kids go, look, for instance, the founder of If Not Now went K through 12 to a Jewish school. So my only kind of, it's not as a disagreement, but kind of contribution to what you're saying is that when you say just be Jewish, it's not, they think that they're doing it because they're Jewish.
So for sure. I mean, I do think that some of them do. And I think that the leaders of the movement particularly will do that. I will ask, I'm not sure what school, the K through, what K through 12 school, they're not all the same, right? If you went to a K through 12 Jewish school where the only value that you were taught was some sort of broad version of Tikkun Olam, that's a bit of a different thing than you went to a school in which, you were learning about how a Seder works, as my kids do around Pesach time, or they're learning the Parsha of the week, right? That's a bit of a different thing. The more deeply ensconced you are in an ideology that is Torah related, at least in a sort of, Tzioni way, in a sort of Zionist way, then the more you'll reflect that. But yes, I mean, I think what that comes down to, again, the amount of strange new respect you get being able to be a quote unquote Jew. And I say quote unquote because many people are not practicing, a quote unquote Jew who is speaking out against the Jews. I mean, that's instant notoriety. If you were just somebody who's not Jewish, who's speaking out against, the state of Israel, then there are a lot of those. But if you're a Jew who's doing it, and then you get to claim as a Jew, that now you get to rebut the other Jews, then that's a really sexy pitch. Now you're going to get a spot on TV. Now people are going to pretend that you know what you're talking about. Now people can use you as a tool, a weapon against Zionism, against the state of Israel, because, and again, based on a sort of donning of the garb, while at the same time speaking out against the thing.
Yeah. And this isn't new. I always say this when I give talks. This isn't a new phenomenon for Jews. The history of Jews participating in anti-Jewish movements. I don't know if you know this, Ben, but in the Soviet Union, there was the Yevsektsiya, the Jewish section of the Communist Party, and they were used by the Soviets. Later on, the Soviets in the 1980s instituted the anti-Zionist committee, all of which were Jews. So they really used these Jews to push the anti-Zionist agenda, and they were very successful at it. All right, so as we're coming to the end of the segment, look, we've spent some time kind of diagnosing some of the problems. I want to just, you gave some solutions, but I want to just ask you the following. I work with Jewish day schools and non-Jewish day schools, and I see kids graduating with deep knowledge of the Shoah, of, as you say, Tikkun Olam, but really very little framework for the war against us. And also, I'll say one more thing, very little literacy, ideological literacy, very easy to succumb to propaganda. If you could give us a piece of advice to every Jewish school in America, then a piece of advice to Jewish organizations, and a piece of advice to Jewish parents, what are those three things?
So for schools, I would say that you really do need to expose kids to the arguments against Zionism and against Israel, and then you need to provide them the information so that they know what the arguments are. And you need to take those on honestly and openly. I think sometimes, like anything else, there's a tendency to sort of ignore the question because it's annoying or it's uncomfortable or because it forces you to do some research. But I think that if you're not asking the question and giving good answers and rational and truthful answers, then kids will find bad answers. So I think there's that. As far as institutions and organizations, I would say stop wasting your time on billboards. I think that there are too many billboards and not enough education. You should focus on the education, and you should focus on allowing kids to feel not like victims, like they're strong and like they're powerful in the world, like they can make a difference. I think no kid wants to feel like a victim. It's why, when I was growing up, my parents became Orthodox when I was 11 years old. The only trip that I made to Israel was when I was 16 because we couldn't afford to go until I was 16 as a family. And now, thank God, we can afford to go pretty regularly. I will say that actually spending time in Israel is a life-changing experience for a lot of Jewish kids who have only seen this sort of stuff from afar and need to understand how the actual system in Israel works in order to rebut many of the presumptions. And as far as parents, again, I think that when it comes to parents, you need to practice this proudly with your kids. Kids can also sense when you're not proud of being a Zionist, or when you're not proud of being Jewish. They can sense when you feel reticence. They're very, very aware of this sort of stuff. And so if you're walking around kind of shy of being hit, if you're walking around saying, well, I've said this in a religious sense to every Orthodox Jew that I know, you should wear a kippah publicly, because when you wear a kippah, what you're saying is, I am this thing and I'm not embarrassed to be this thing. And then your kids won't be embarrassed to be that thing. It never occurs to them not to be embarrassed to be that thing. And so I think that being proud in the world as somebody who believes in the state of Israel and the virtue of the state of Israel and the strength of the state of Israel, that is a good thing to be, in the same way that you should be, if you're in Canada, a proud Canadian. If you're an American, you should be a proud American. You should I'm deeply proud to be an American, the greatest country in world history. It is an enormous privilege to be American. It would never occur to me to not be proud of being an American. It would never occur to me not to be proud to be a Jew. And it would not occur to me not to be proud to be a Zionist. Of course, I'm proud to be a Zionist, because it is an extraordinary, the project of an extraordinary building of a state on the land given by God to the Jewish people is miraculous. The achievements of the state of Israel are miraculous. They are making the region better. They are making the world better. And I think it's also important to recognize, and I think this is a big one, not every country works the same. I think one of the things that people tend to do is they tend to universalize how America is to how Israel should be, or how Israel is to how America should be, or how Japan should be to how Israel should be. And that seems to me a gigantic category error that's easily avoided.
Absolutely. I often look, I'm also from the former Soviet Union, but I came when I was a very young girl. But I often say that American Jews have a relationship to Israel. It's twofold. It could be Israel is or Israel does. For me, as a Jew from the former Soviet Union, it's an Israel is model. Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people. For many American Jews, it's the does model. Well, if Israel behaves in the ways that align with my moral sensibilities, my values, then I'm going to support Israel. But the moment Israel kind of distances or moves to a moral kind of behavior that I disapprove of, I don't support. It's this strange relationship, as you just said. Well, look, I'm very excited that you will be with us for this very first ever symposium to combat anti-Zionism. I'm going to withhold more of my questions for when I join you on stage. So there you have it on this special segment of Don't Know Much About. As I said, Ben will be joining us in person in Toronto, Canada. You can still purchase your tickets at www.stopaz.com/symposium. As always, it all begins with a question. Till next time.